All right. Hey, I want to jump on here real quick because I want to talk about how people think progress works in comparison to how progress actually works. And you'll be able to relate to this because you probably found yourself stuck in the same cycle of defeat. All right. So, right here, what you see is you have this little guy, and this dude is here, and he can take two paths to making progress. The first path is how people think progress works, which is typical. And then the less than typical is how progress actually works. Now let's talk about what most people think. And so first is they think it comes with knowledge. Yeah, it's not letting me unclick this here. Give me a second. There. Boom. They think it comes with knowledge. So this is like going to school, right? You go to school and then learn some things, and it doesn't matter what grade you're in, from elementary all the way to college, you learn some things, you take some tests, and those tests give you your score, which equals results, right? Well, school tells you, okay, now you need to, let's go back on that. School will say, okay, now that you've got the results, you passed the test, now you need to go back to knowledge, learn some more, and then take another test and you get more results. All right. And then it's this endless cycle of gaining knowledge and getting the results. But guess what? The results is only you taking a test. There isn't anything that really goes beyond that. And I could tell you the difference between knowledge and results is knowing how to apply knowledge. So the results that we typically get when we're trying to gather knowledge is the ability to answer a question, or it's the ability to pass the test. If, 2 plus 2 equals 4, okay, I have the knowledge of that. The result is 4. But that's about it. Okay, so now let's go back to knowledge. 3 plus 3 equals 6. Boom, I now have the results of 3 plus 3 equals 6. But how do you apply that? How do you actually implement knowledge? How do you get results with the knowledge that you have? School doesn't necessarily teach that, and neither do a lot of companies. And so what we tend to do is we tend to find ourselves in this constant cycle of getting what is perceived results to make someone happy, to appease your boss, to pass the test, to get a 70 or higher, to graduate school, to go to the next grade, right? This is that cycle. And this is how people leave the education system, and they believe progress works in the same way. I get the knowledge, and that me having the knowledge is the result, but it's not. That's not the result at all. And so I remember when this really became apparent to me whenever I was in high school, my senior year in high school. I had signed up for a college, 1-year college class for welding. And it was paid for by the school I was going to, which I was, through a scholarship program. I was, very humbled by that. Well, I went to the welding class, and my instructor's talking about how to do certain things, like how to cut this piece of metal into a certain length with this certain angle, and then you have to weld it like this, and everything. And he used a math formula to try to get there, and I had no idea, like, how do you do that? None of that made any sense to me. Okay, hold on. Let me try to go back here. And so none of that made any sense to me. I couldn't figure out what was going on or why that mattered. And then I went to my high school teacher, my math teacher, and I said, hey, my college instructor is telling me to cut the metal like this and do this and that. And he gave us this math problem, and I have no idea, like, how to do this math problem. And then he broke it down. He says, okay, X is this part of your piece of metal. And then Y is this section of your piece of metal. And when you were multiplying this number by X, you were multiplying this by the length of the metal. And he broke it down specifically for me. And then what it went to was realizing that I had the knowledge of the formula. So an example would be, if you gave me that formula without applying it to real life scenarios, like cutting a piece of metal to the perfect length that you need to weld it at, if you gave me only the formula, I could get you the result, period. But if you wanted to give me the formula to cut a piece of metal, which means I lacked this now, I know the formula, but I don't know how to apply that formula. So therefore, the results meant nothing and the knowledge meant nothing at that point because I could not apply them. When he showed me that, that's when I learned how to apply what I knew about math and formulas and stuff. And so when you are stuck in this cycle of knowledge to results, back to knowledge to results, and you don't know how to actually apply it, what it creates for you is a cycle of hardships and disappointment. You constantly find yourself in hardship after hardship after hardship, not being able to make progress, not being able to get to the next level because you lack the knowledge to get the actual results. You only have the knowledge of results, but you don't know how to get results because you don't know how to apply it effectively. And that leads you to constant disappointment over and over and over again. You set a goal, you don't make the progress you want, so it's really difficult for you, it's really hard for you, and then you get disappointed because you can't apply it and you can't make the progress you want to make. So then you go back to learning more knowledge, and then you get back to the results section, and then it's harder again, and then disappointment. It's a cycle that just continuously never ends. So that's how people think progress works. But now let's talk about how progress actually works, okay? So first is you have theory. Theory is how the progress itself actually works. It all starts with this idea of trying to accomplish something, but we don't actually know what it's going to take to get there, right? And so then I forgot. All right. So then after theory, which is the idea of the thing, then you have experience. Experience is the thing that takes you to that next level where you begin to apply the theory. I have this thought of, if I cut the metal to this length, it should fit in that specific spot. Okay, that's your theory. You cut the metal to the right or to that length that you theorized would be accurate. Then you put the metal up to that part and you realize, oh, wait a minute, it's too long. I need to cut it more. Oh, I didn't account for this other thing. Oh, wait a minute. I forgot that other piece is supposed to go here. So therefore, I need to actually cut the length, the length, 2 inches shorter to make room for this other part that's going to come in later, right? So that's the theory to experience. And the experience is where you go to the next phase, which is the knowledge. Okay, so you have theory, then you have experience, and then you have the knowledge, right? The theory was to cut the metal to the right length, to 6 inches or whatever. The experience was you tried to cut it to 6 inches, realized that you didn't measure it right, and you cut it too long. Well, that's better than cutting it too short, right? So you cut it too long, and the metal is now 7 inches or 8 inches, and then you have the knowledge of that. So you go back to theory. Oh, wait a minute. I believe that what happened was I measured it wrong because of this situation. So therefore, I need to, in the future, if I want to measure something right, I got to account for this little wiggle room here. I've got to account for this. And then you go back to your experience. It moves back to experience now. So you went back to theory, you readjusted. Now you got more experience. That experience, you make your new cut, you do what you got to do, and then you have knowledge, right? And then that knowledge is applied through this process. Okay, so this is the process of you applying the knowledge. You notice one thing here. Pay attention. In school, we learn knowledge first, and our results is actually the knowledge itself. There is no results beyond just knowing the thing. There's no applying it. There's no truly understanding it. There's no getting experience with it. It's simply just knowledge. The results of education is knowledge. It's the same thing with going to college and you get a degree. You go to college for 4 years or 6 years, whatever, you get a bachelor's degree, you get out of college, what do you have? Knowledge. What is your results? Your results is only knowledge. That's it. You have a degree that says, I have knowledge, here's my results, but you don't actually have any real results. I'm not dogging that, but when you go to work for a company and they're saying, hey, we're looking for somebody with a bachelor's degree in this job, and you go there and you begin to finally put your knowledge to work, you realize you don't have any experience. And you're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And that's when you go from the education's idea to actually theory, where you realize, like, wait a minute, okay, in college I learned this, but that doesn't necessarily apply here because we have a different process. And so there we go. Okay, now I got experience because I learned that there's a different process, and now I have knowledge. Oh, wait a minute, that didn't work still. So now we go back to theory, back to experience, back to knowledge, back to theory, and you get better and better each time you go back around. Knowledge starts here, and the results you get from the knowledge is actually the knowledge, which is literally not very much because you can't apply it. There's nothing applied there. But here you start with theory, which is an idea. It's a thought process of what may or may not work. And then you go to experience. That's when you realize you put your hand to the plow. You actually start cutting the metal. You start applying what you learn or theorized would be accurate. And then you find out what worked, what didn't work, what was right, what wasn't right. And then you go back to theory, because now you're having more knowledge of what didn't work and what might work, which is theory, what might work. And then you go and you apply that again to experience, and then experience gives you greater knowledge, which then you cycle back again. Okay, so it's a loop there. Now, what this means is here you have your inputs. Okay, so these are the things that you're putting into. You theorize, if I do A, B, and C, that's the action part of experience, I will get, end result. And then and that's the knowledge. You actually discover whether or not you got that result. Okay, and then you have the outcomes, which is the second portion here, the outcomes. So if I do these things, A, B, and C, I will get this outcome. Then you learn whether or not that worked. And then you go back, and this is when we enter the recycling phase here, which is educated theories for better inputs. So then you go back here and you say, okay, I theorize if I change these inputs or add these or remove these, or if I cut it just like this, then I'm going to get the experience and the outcome that I need. And then you learn whether that worked or not. And then if it did, you go back, and then you eventually get to the point where you eliminate theory, and it only cycles here between knowledge, experience, knowledge, experience, knowledge, and then eventually, you're getting results from that. So the last phase here would be technically results, or what I would rather say, progress. So this would lead to progress eventually if you continue this cycle over and over again, right? And that's what it kind of happened there. Now, this leads to something different, which is growth and fulfillment. One, you grow through the process of theorizing what inputs may or may not work. You experience that, and you gain experience by practicing and doing different things. You get certain outputs, then you learn from what those outputs are, what worked and what didn't work, and then you go back, and now you have an educated theory again. You change your inputs, you add inputs, remove inputs, you gain more experience, you get outputs that you either foresaw, didn't solve, but or foresee, and then you gain knowledge, and you keep doing this until eventually you make progress. Okay, now this cycle here may take you 20 times before you finally get it. It may take you 100 times before you finally get it. What is his name? Thomas Edison? I forget, man. Please forgive me. But the guy who made the light bulb, 10,000 tries, and it didn't work. And what was he doing? He was theorizing what would work. He put into practice what inputs would get the experience or the results. He got the results, the outcomes that he was looking for or didn't look for. Then he learned, and then he tried again. He theorized new ways that might work. And then 10,000 times later, he made the real progress he needed, or let's say results, right? Then he got the results that he was looking for. Now, all of this produces growth and fulfillment. And that is the idea. So here's the difference between how people think progress works and how progress actually works. Why this is important is because if you continue to believe that this is how life is supposed to be, you're going to continue to be disappointed. You're going to fail hitting your goals. You're not going to achieve the progress you want. You're going to keep looking for progress. And the only progress you're going to see is, oh, I acquired more knowledge, but that knowledge is the result. But guess what? The result itself is supposed to be actual growth and fulfillment. And it's supposed to be actual progress. This is why so many people are stuck in this loop and they're never making the progress they want to make. You've got to start theorizing what inputs through experience are going to get you the outputs you want, and then you're going to learn what worked and didn't work, and then you're going to go back with the educated theory, adjust your inputs, you have new experiences, get new outcomes, and you're going to keep doing this again and again, and eventually it'll go from knowledge to experience to getting better outcomes, and you'll have growth and fulfillment through that. So that's all I got for you today, but I did definitely want to show you the difference between how people think progress works and how it actually works. All right, see ya.